Um, so what I would like to look at today is just to go further a little bit on that whole story of the Machtot, these fire pans that this whole story of the fire that happened, because what we find is just that it becomes quite surprising that after these 250, so there's Korach and these 250 elders, and the elders bring their fire and they bring the ketoret, and it's quite an intense time because they're not supposed to do that. They actually know that they're not supposed to do that because it's clear from the story of Datan and Aviram um, that Nadav and Avihu. That's clear from the story that if you bring a ketoret in an inappropriate way, so then it's going to negatively impact on you. But nonetheless, they bring it, and then the Torah says in chapter 16, verse 35, "Va'esh yatzam et Adonai v'tochal et hachamishim u'matayim ish makrivei haketoret." And fire comes out from Ma'et Hashem, from Hashem Himself, and consumes the 250 men who were Makrivei HaKetoret, the ones who were offering the incense. And it seems to be very simple, exactly what it is. However, Ha'emek Davar, the Nativ says that the Torah is telling us a very special story here. The Torah is telling us where the fire came from, or where else could the fire have come from? It didn't come from Hashem. So he says it could have come from, as we said yesterday, it could have come from the Ketoret, it could have come from the coals that they brought. It could have been that they suddenly combusted and burnt the people out, but no. It doesn't come from the fire of the Ketoret. Hashem. It comes from Hashem. So where did it come from? So he says, it came straight out of the Kodesh, standing outside the Kodesh Kedoshim, and this fire comes and burns them up. Why does it have to come from the Kodesh? Why is that such an important thing for us to know? He says this death that they get is like the halacha of when Azar HaKarev Mochima, a person who's not supposed to be present by the Kodesh Kedoshim or in the inner chambers of the Beis HaMikdash, which we call a zar, a stranger, not a person who's not supposed to be there at that point in time. They're supposed to die. But if that's the case, they're not supposed to die through HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're supposed to be taken and judged accordingly and punished by the Beis Din. Omnam, he says, he says that these 250 men were given covered, amazing covered. That they died, HaKadosh Baruch Hu ensures that they died with covered, in order, just like the Nadav and Avihu, as it says by Nadav and Avihu, that also was Ma'et Hashem. And it's quite interesting and surprising that HaKadosh Baruch Hu felt that these people, even though they were actually coming against everything that was represented by the Kahuna Gedola, i.e. an individual space where one person takes over and connects with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in that profound way, nonetheless, because they were leaders of the people, they still deserved a certain level of kavod, which I think is quite an important thing for us to understand. That sometimes people make mistakes, but even in the mistake, they still deserve a certain level of kavod abrius, of kavod for their position, and we need to just be aware. It doesn't mean that they can't be punished and can't get the appropriate consequence for their action, but nonetheless, there has to be a certain level of cover. Okay, Rabbeinu Bechaya wants to try and understand why is it that different people were punished in different way. So we know that Korach gets swallowed up into the ground by this mouth of this earth that opens. But how come the 250 men weren't swallowed up as well? If at the end of the day it's all part of Korach v'adato, Korach and his chevra, so why do they not all get the same punishment? So it says the Rabbeinu Bechaya, Hakadosh Baruch Hu midah keneged midah. It says that the way Hakadosh Baruch Hu acts is always midah keneged midah. That whatever we do, there's a corresponding action to that, and it's a direct relation to the thing that's been done. So Korach wanted a level of covered, a level of positioning within the Jewish people that wasn't appropriate for him. And with this, he came and had a quarrel with HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. Lefichach, therefore, what does he get judged with? Nidun b'yeridah. Him and all the people who were close to him, they wanted to try to get a higher level, and so they were taken down. As Chazal saying, Bamidbar, they come down. V'chein inyano shel Korach. And this is so too with Korach. Korach is the Av. He is he's the president of all people who present an arrogant presentation, and that they want to take a certain level of shrara, a certain level of leadership within Am Yisrael shelo kedin, that they will always be brought down. They will not be elevated into the position that they're supposed to. Ultimately, there'll be a level of they'll be brought down. It's fascinating because we know until such time as the earth opened up, Korach is presented amongst Bnei Yisrael on a certain level that's actually quite powerful. But nonetheless, the earth swallows him up and he suffers. Gamba kana onish asrefa. He says so too. The punishment of the burning up of the 250 people, that was also midah keneged midah. Why? These 250 shayu b'chorot, and he tells us a new thing, that these 250 were not just nasi'ei haidah. They weren't just the leaders. They were actually b'chorim. They were actually the firstborns of their tribes. Ba'u la'akriv katoret al gabei ha'esh. They came to bring katoret. They bring al gabei ha'esh on this fire, and with their fire pans in their hands, and therefore they are judged with fire. They're coming to do something. They're coming to do something that they're not supposed to do, bringing the katoret with the fire, and so therefore they get judged with the fire. And on that, David HaMelech said, "V'tivara eish ba'adatam." There's a pasuk in Tehillim Kuf Vav, that's 106, which where David HaMelech says, a fire blazed amongst their party, a flame that consumed the wicked. And so we see, says Rabbeinu Bachaya, that because they tried to do a thing that wasn't appropriate for them, so therefore they get burnt up. But now what happens is, as we know, it would seem to be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes and he destroys them and he's machabed them in that way. But that's it. However, it's an amazing thing that the Torah then says, "V'adaber Adonai Moshe lemor, emor Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen." Speak to Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. He's one of the great Kohanim. Elazar, and tell him, "Vayarem et hamachtot mi bein haserefa." Tell him to go and vayarem, to lift the machtot, those fire pans, mi bein haserefa, from all the fire. V'et ha'esh zrei hala ki kadeshu. And throw off the eish. We'll understand what that means. Ki kadesh, because those fire pans have become sacred, which is quite an interesting thing. These are the fire pans that are used for inappropriate connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nonetheless, they become sacred. And says Rashi, the fire. This is the fire that was of the coals on the machtot. Where must throw them onto the ground? Ki kadesh, because the machtot have now become kadosh. What does it mean that they've become kadosh? And Rashi tells us, "Va'asurin b'hana'ah." No one can get any benefit from that. Sharei asaum kli sharet. They've been made into, by the 250 bringing the incense, even though it was inappropriate, and that's how the Maharal explains it. Even though it was inappropriate, nonetheless, it was used for the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Interestingly, so that's a very different take on what they were doing. V'asaum kli sharet. They've become vessels of service to Hashem, and so and then we know that they become as a the way the Torah then explains. You take the fire pans, and they need to be made into what? Into vasu otam rukuei pachim tzipuyei lemizbeach. They don't just become some type of far away kli sharet, this some type of vessel that was used at some point in time, but rather they are hammered out into sheets. They flattened out, and then they're put as kind of like a plating around the mizbeach. Why? Ki hakrivum lifnei Adonai vayikdashu, because they were used for some type of offering to be brought close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in that way they became sacred. Vayula ot livnei Israel, and also to be as an ot, as a sign to Bnei Israel. And what is the sign? Rashi tells us, lezikaron sheyomru elu hayu me'otam shenechlaku ala kahuna v'nisrafu. These are these things that we see around the mizbeach. That shining copper that is around the mizbeach, the plating comes from those people who nechlaku ala kahuna v'nisrafu. It's from those who argued against the kahuna, and they v'nisrafu, and they were burnt up. And so it's a difficult thing to really think, like, what is it that they're really wanting from their from what is it that Hashem is wanting from Bnei Israel, to see these things and say, oh, it's from the people who argued with the kahuna and then they got burnt up. So the Netziv says that hamashmaut ot the kanhu, the following, it's derech eretz. What's the derech eretz? Shelo yehei adam mitbarach bilvavo litkadesh l'mayla midat elyon Hashem. It says, you know what it is? The derech eretz is that you shouldn't try to be in a way to mitbarech bilvavo, that should elevate in yourself litkadesh l'mayla midat Hashem, to try and make oneself more kadosh than the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to be. V'od says furthermore, says a person who serves avodah zarah, if we understand, doesn't only mean idol worship, but it also means a worship which is not according to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. It's still maybe connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not like an apikoros, a person who throws away the yoke of Hashem, or degrades Hashem. That's not what they did. Ela shekiblu on sham chelek hakadosh baruch hu lehem kavod. If you remember, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that there was a certain level of kavod. Why was there kavod? Because these people, what they were trying to do was trying to serve Hashem. That's how we try and put them into this picture, trying to serve Hashem in a better way. But they couldn't do that, and so therefore these ha'era HaKadosh Baruch Hu kan b'machtot, that through the machtot, through this plate around the altar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, look at that and look clearly. Where is your real positioning within Am Yisrael? Have you maximized that position in Am Yisrael? Have you maximized your own spirituality, or do you have to strive for somebody else's spirituality? No, we have to look at these machtot and remember that we have to work on what we need to achieve in ourselves, and not look at others and say, have I achieved that yet? Not what they have achieved. It's like that story we all know of Zusha, where Zusha was that great Hasidic Rebbe, and he was crying, and they said to him, Zusha, why are you crying? And he said, because when I go up to Shamayim, they're not going to ask me, was I like Avraham Avinu? They're not going to ask me, was I like David HaMelech? They're going to say to me, Zusha, were you really Zusha? Did we really maximize who we were? And that is part of the lesson of these machtot, of these plates that come around, these great 250 great people, that were the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu presents them. It seems to be that their service was kadosh. It was holy, it was real, and therefore the fire pans that they used were kadosh. However, they were striving for something that wasn't for them. And perhaps one of the greatest lessons we can learn from that is to say, what is it that I need to do? And it demands a lot of deep introspection. What is it that I need to do in order to achieve the highest level of spirituality that I can do? Not what the others are doing, but what I can do. And in doing that, we can certainly achieve great things in our lives.